Should Gojo return to Jujutsu Kaisen? Major spoilers for anyone who was not caught up on the manga. Okay, so as you know, Gojo was killed by Sukuna, but that hasn't stopped the community from coming up with all kinds of theories as to why Gojo is going to come back. And I get it, Gojo is a hype character and people would like to imagine a scenario in which he gets revenge on Sukuna. So rather than try and explain why this will never happen, I'd like to discuss how Gojo could come back, only so I can carefully list each reason why this is a terrible idea. Now, we know Sukuna saw Ouji on the battlefield, at which point he theorized that Ouji probably carted Gojo away to safety. From here, we can pretty much fill in the blanks. The basic idea would be that the characters would use reverse curse technique to heal Gojo or some other kind of jujutsu technique in order to heal him before he officially dies. Then Gojo would come back to either finish off Sukuna or help out in the fight. We've seen characters heal and get painkillers often enough that we can basically picture how this would happen and why it really isn't that unlikely. So before I get into why this is a terrible idea, I'd like to start by addressing one of the sort of positives of bringing Gojo back. If you recall, Gojo has been in this situation before. Back in his fight against Toji, Toji basically killed Gojo the first time. He ripped open Gojo's throat, stabbed his leg a bunch of times, and then stabbed him in the head. But Gojo explains that he was able to survive by using reverse curse technique as soon as Toji landed the first attack. This was when Gojo was a teenager and he discovered the technique for the very first time. Now let's imagine we're in the Sukuna fight and Sukuna slices Gojo up. Are you telling me Gojo doesn't think to do the exact same thing decades later when he's more powerful and more experienced? I'm not saying it'd be bad writing if he didn't. As a matter of fact, I can see this argued either way. But one reason why this would be a good thing is because it makes sense given Gojo's past feats. If he can heal himself after getting his throat ripped out and his brain attacked, he should be able to do it again when he's cut in two, at least to some extent. It would cover all the bases of Gojo doing everything he can, and it wouldn't leave a bunch of questions like why didn't Gojo heal himself? That is what I would consider the biggest pro for bringing Gojo back. Not considering obvious reasons like having him in the ending or getting revenge on Sukuna. Now let's talk about why Gojo's return would ruin Sukuna. Actually, before I do that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. Now, no matter how you look at it, if Gojo comes back, it only adds to the case of Sukuna being a fraud. For example, let's imagine a scenario where Gojo comes back and he gets the final blow on Sukuna. Clearly that ruins Sukuna's standing as a villain. He gets a powered up body and Megumi, uses Mahoraga against Gojo, literally slices him in two, and Gojo comes back and still defeats him. Basically, it's like saying Sukuna never had a chance of winning and it kinda kills his purpose as the villain. Because if Gojo was always going to come back and defeat Sukuna no matter what, then it renders everything Sukuna does completely pointless. But now let's imagine a similar scenario where Gojo comes back, but he doesn't get the final blow. Either he just helps the other character somehow, or he doesn't even do that. He's so weak from the fight that he survives, but he watches the rest of the fight and he's just there to be in the final chapters. I mentioned earlier how this can be argued either way. We already talked about how on the one hand this is a good thing because it would be consistent with Gojo's feats. But on the other hand, this would kind of hurt the overall quality of Jujutsu Kaisen. Because if a character like Gojo can come back from death not once but twice, it kind of hurts your suspension of disbelief. I will point out that it's not as big a deal simply because this is the end, so it's like, who cares, the story is basically over. But talking about it now, one can only wonder how this would impact the popular opinion of Jujutsu Kaisen. Because we do have important deaths like Junpei or Nobara or Nanami, so obviously you can't say that nobody ever dies in this story. But it's not unreasonable to be annoyed by this story where you have all these crazy villains and only a handful of characters really ever die. Not to say characters like Maki or Megumi shouldn't survive, but if Gojo survives, it could very well lead to this discourse of, okay, how impactful are deaths in Jujutsu Kaisen really? Especially when we got a full near-death experience at the end of the Sukuna fight. So if you do all that just to bring Gojo back, it kinda renders that whole experience meaningless. It'd be like, well, I lived my life the best I could, and then he comes back and it's like, haha, just kidding. Another reason Gojo coming back would be a bad thing is because it would probably hurt how we view the other characters in this fight. So let's say we're in the first scenario where Gojo comes back in the final fight and gets the final blow. Well, now Yuji and the other characters look pretty stupid. It'd be another case of, well, if Gojo was always going to come back, then everything Yuji, Yuta, and Maki do in this fight is basically pointless. They're basically just keeping Sukuna busy while Gojo can heal and come back for the kill. Now let's imagine the other scenario where Gojo comes back and he either helps out or just watches the fight. This would still make the characters look pretty stupid, because if they still need Gojo's help to stop Sukuna, they don't look nearly as strong or as competent than if they did it by themselves. And if Gojo just watches the fight, it puts you in this case of like, okay, so now they're just fooling around. It'd be like when Goku had Gohan fight Cell. Sure, Goku probably couldn't beat Cell in that state, but it still feels stupid to just have him sitting there while he makes Gohan fight. Sure, Gojo might not be of any use, but I can't help but think it would be silly to be in this scenario where Yuji and the others are fighting Sukuna and Gojo's just like, wow, great job guys. Now who wants McDonald's? And speaking of Yuji, this is probably my biggest issue with Gojo coming back. Because we already have this narrative issue with Yuji kind of being on the sidelines on a lot of the story, and we finally set things up in a way that Yuji is carrying the narrative and he's actually in a position of leadership in this fight against Sukuna. So if Gojo comes back to the fight, then you rob him of that. And if Gojo survives, then it brings into question, well, how useful was Yuji as a character anyway? So this is why Gojo coming back to the story is generally a bad idea. True, it would make perfect sense. We've seen Gojo do it before, so it would be kind of confusing if he couldn't do it again. But there's a laundry list of ways it would hurt the story's integrity. It would make Sukuna look dumb, it would make characters like Yuta and Maki look pointless in this fight, and it would undermine Yuji's role as the protagonist. For all of these reasons and more, Gojo should not come back in Jujutsu Kaisen. But maybe I'm wrong. So now I'd like to hear what you think. Do you think Gojo should come back? What are your theories for the return of Gojo? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my video on the art of Jujutsu Kaisen. In that video, I analyzed the artistic evolution of the Jujutsu Kaisen manga. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.